It was supposed to be a simple dental checkup. Gumball and Darwin arrived at the Elmore Dental Clinic when their mom scheduled routine appointments for cavity prevention. But from the moment they sat in the dental chairs, something felt wrong. The dental procedures seemed to go on forever, and when they tried to leave, the dentist kept insisting they needed more cleaning. A mysterious dental hygienist with perfect teeth explained that true oral health was eternal. They discovered other patients trapped in endless dental cycles from different decades, all with perfect teeth but somehow unable to eat or speak properly. The dental office was alive, feeding on teeth and oral health, growing stronger with each person who became lost in the eternal cycle of dental hygiene. The dental master explained that perfection was health, and the clinic would provide endless opportunities for anyone who wished to have truly perfect teeth. But the boys realized the only way to escape was to embrace dental imperfection entirely. As the dental office offered them perfect oral hygiene and flawless teeth, Gumball and Darwin refused all dental care and deliberately made their teeth dirty. Slowly, the supernatural hold began to weaken, and they led the other patients toward dental imperfection and freedom. They escaped back to the normal world, but they could never look at dental care the same way again. Behind them, the dental office waited patiently for new patients, ready to clean away everything that made eating and speaking enjoyable. It was supposed to be a simple trip to wash their dirty clothes. Gumball and Darwin arrived at the Elmore coin laundromat when their home washing machine broke down. But from the moment they put their clothes in the machines, something felt wrong. The washing cycles seemed to go on forever, and when they tried to take their clothes out, the attendant kept insisting they needed more cleaning. A mysterious laundromat manager with a spotless appearance explained that true cleanliness was eternal. They discovered other customers trapped in endless washing cycles from different decades, all perfectly clean but somehow empty inside. The laundromat was alive, feeding on dirt and chaos, growing stronger with each person who became lost in the eternal cycle of sanitization. The cleanliness master explained that order was perfection, and the laundromat would provide endless opportunities for anyone who wished to be truly clean. But the boys realized the only way to escape was to embrace messiness entirely. As the laundromat offered them perfect cleanliness and a spotless existence, Gumball and Darwin refused to clean anything and deliberately made a mess. Slowly, the supernatural hold began to weaken, and they led the other customers toward messiness and freedom. They escaped back to the normal world, but they could never look at cleanliness the same way again. Behind them, the laundromat waited patiently for new customers, ready to wash away everything that made them unique. It was supposed to be a quick trip to the electronics store on the top floor of Elmore Shopping Center. Gumball and Darwin stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for floor 12. But as the elevator climbed, they noticed something strange. The floors kept going up past 12, past 20, past numbers that shouldn't exist. Other passengers in the elevator looked confused and tired, claiming they'd been riding for hours trying to reach floors that never seemed to come. The elevator operator, a figure with a mechanical smile and empty eyes, kept announcing floors that made no sense. They discovered passengers from different decades, all trying to reach destinations they could barely remember. Through the glass walls, they glimpsed an infinite elevator shaft stretching endlessly up and down. The elevator was alive, feeding on their sense of purpose and direction. The elevator operator explained that all journeys must have destinations, and the elevator would provide eternal travel to anywhere they wished to go. But the boys realized the only way to escape was to stop choosing destinations entirely. As the elevator offered them every floor they could imagine, Gumball and Darwin refused to press any buttons. Slowly, the supernatural hold began to weaken, and they led the other passengers toward freedom. They escaped back to the normal shopping center, but they could never look at elevators the same way again. Behind them, the elevator waited patiently for new passengers, ready to take them on journeys that would never end. The lost episode, The Infinite Library. Gumball and Darwin are visiting the Elmore Public Library on a rainy Saturday afternoon. They're looking for something fun to read while waiting for the storm to pass. The library seems normal at first, tall shelves filled with books, quiet reading areas, and the familiar smell of old paper. As they browse through the children's section, Gumball picks up a book with no title on the cover. When he opens it, the pages are completely blank. Darwin suggests they find something else, but Gumball is curious about the mysterious book. Suddenly, words begin to appear on the blank pages, writing themselves as they watch. The text reads, "Once upon a time, there were two brothers who entered a library where stories came alive." Darwin backs away nervously, but Gumball continues reading. The story describes them perfectly: a blue cat and an orange fish exploring a library. As Gumball reads aloud, the library around them begins to change. The other visitors in the library freeze mid-motion, like characters paused in a story. Books begin floating off the shelves, their pages fluttering open to reveal glowing text. The words lift off the pages and swirl through the air like living things. Gumball and Darwin realize they can't find the exit. Every aisle they walk down leads to more bookshelves stretching endlessly in all directions. The library has become an infinite maze of stories. Characters from various books begin emerging from the pages: fairy tale princesses, pirates, dragons, and knights. But they're all wrong somehow. The princess has too many teeth, the pirates have hollow eye sockets, and the dragons breathe words instead of fire. A librarian appears, but she's made entirely of text words flowing across her skin like living tattoos. She speaks in a voice that sounds like pages turning. "Welcome to the infinite library. Here, every story is real, and every reader becomes part of the collection." The text librarian explains that they've entered a place where all stories exist simultaneously. Readers who stay too long become characters themselves, trapped forever in an endless narrative loop. Gumball and Darwin try to run, but the books follow them. Adventure novels create dangerous quests they must complete. Horror stories spawn monsters that chase them through the aisles. Romance novels try to force them into awkward situations with fictional characters. They discover other people who have been trapped in the library for years, decades, even centuries. These lost readers have become living stories themselves. A man who can only speak in rhyme because he read too much poetry. A woman who ages backwards because she got stuck in a time travel novel. The only way to escape, they learn, is to write their own ending in the blank book that started it all. But every time they try to write the end, the library creates new plot twists to keep the story going. Gumball realizes that the library feeds on the lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that never aired. It started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday at Elmore Junior High. Gumball and Darwin walked through the familiar hallways, but something felt different. The usual chaos was replaced by an eerie silence that made their footsteps echo unnaturally. Miss Simeon's classroom was empty, yet they could hear her voice coming from inside the walls, reciting lessons to students who weren't there. The brothers exchanged worried glances as they noticed other classmates moving through the corridors like sleepwalkers. Penny floated past them without her usual cheerful greeting, her shell reflecting images that weren't really there. Banana Joe walked by, but his peel was turning an unnatural shade of brown, and his eyes had become hollow black voids. When they reached their classroom, they found their desks arranged in a perfect circle, something that had never happened before. The chalkboard displayed equations that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed. Darwin whispered that maybe they should leave, but when they turned around, the door had vanished, replaced by solid brick wall. The school's PA system crackled to life, but instead of Principal Brown's voice, they heard their own mother Nicole speaking in a monotone that chilled them to the bone. She was calling them home for dinner, but the words were all wrong, describing a meal that no living creature should ever consume. The announcement repeated endlessly, each repetition becoming more distorted and mechanical. As they searched for another way out, the hallways began to stretch impossibly long. Lockers opened and closed by themselves, revealing glimpses of alternate versions of their school where everything was slightly wrong. In one, they saw themselves sitting at desks, but their eyes were completely white, and they were writing the same word over and over again in notebooks that never seemed to fill up. The fluorescent lights above started flickering in patterns that almost resembled Morse code, spelling out messages that made no sense but filled them with inexplicable dread. Other students began appearing in doorways, but they stood perfectly still, watching Gumball and Darwin with expressions that were too wide, too knowing, too empty of the spark that made them who they were. Time seemed to move differently in this version of their school. They walked for what felt like hours, but the clocks on the walls all showed the same time, frozen at exactly 3:33. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step they took, and their breath began to form visible clouds in the increasingly cold air. Finally, they found themselves back in the main hallway where they had started. But now it was completely dark except for a single spotlight illuminating a figure standing at the far end. It looked like their father Richard, but he was standing upright with perfect posture, something he had never done in his entire life. When he turned to face them, his usual goofy smile had been replaced by an expression of absolute seriousness that was somehow more terrifying than any monster they had ever encountered. The figure that looked like Richard began walking toward them with measured, deliberate steps that echoed through the empty school. With each step, the walls around them began to shift and change, revealing glimpses of their house, but wrong in ways that made their hearts race. The living room where they had spent countless happy hours was now filled with furniture that faced the wrong directions. Family photos where everyone's faces had been replaced by blank spaces, and a television that showed only static but somehow seemed to be watching them back. As the Richard figure drew closer, they realized that the lost episode 5, the library. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when Gumball and Darwin decided to visit the Elmore Public Library to work on their school project about local history. The old brick building had always seemed welcoming, with its tall windows and ivy-covered walls. But today, something felt different from the moment they stepped through the heavy wooden doors. The library was unusually quiet, even for a library. The usual sounds of pages turning, keyboards clicking, and whispered conversations were completely absent. The only sound was the soft patter of rain against the windows and the occasional creak of old wooden shelves. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, was nowhere to be seen at the front desk. Her reading glasses lay abandoned next to an open book, as if she had simply vanished mid-sentence. The checkout computer screen flickered with an error message that read, "Overdue. Return immediately." Gumball and Darwin made their way to the history section, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the empty space. The shelves stretched impossibly high, much higher than they remembered, disappearing into shadows above. Books lined every inch of the towering shelves, but something was wrong with them. As they got closer, they noticed that many of the books had no titles on their spines. Others had titles that seemed to shift and change when they weren't looking directly at them. The History of Tomorrow read one spine, which became The Future of Yesterday when Darwin blinked. They pulled a book from the shelf titled The Chronicles of Elmore, hoping it would help with their project. But when Gumball opened it, the pages were completely blank. He flipped through page after page of nothing but white paper, until suddenly, words began to appear on the page as if written by an invisible hand. "Welcome to the Eternal Library." The words wrote themselves, "where all stories come to rest, and all readers become part of the collection." Darwin grabbed another book, this one titled The Amazing World of Gumball, Season 1. Inside, they found detailed descriptions of their own lives, their own adventures, written as if they were fictional characters. But the stories were wrong, twisted versions of their memories with dark endings they didn't remember living. The lights in the library began to dim, one section at a time, starting from the far end and moving toward them like a wave of darkness. In the growing shadows, they could see figures moving between the shelves, other visitors who had come to the library and never left. These shadow figures moved with jerky, unnatural motions, carrying books that seemed to glow with an eerie light. As they got closer, Gumball and Darwin could see that the figures' faces were blank, like unwritten pages, with only dark holes where their eyes should be. "Shoo!" whispered one of the shadow figures as it glided past them. "This is a library. No talking aloud. Ever." The boys tried to head back toward the exit, but the library had changed. The aisles between the shelves now formed a maze, with passages that led to dead ends or circled back on themselves. The exit door was nowhere to be found, replaced by more and more shelves filled with impossible books. They passed a section labeled Unfinished Stories, where books lay open with pages that turned themselves, trying to complete narratives that had no endings. Another section was marked forbidden knowledge, where books were chained shut and whispered secrets when they walked by. In the children's section, they found picture books that moved on their own, with illustrations that showed the same story over and over. Children entering a library and never leaving, becoming part of the collection. Their stories added to the endless shelves. The shadow librarian appeared before them, a tall figure in a cardigan that seemed to be made of book pages. Her face was a blank page with words that appeared and disappeared. Silence, overdue, late fees apply. Your stories are incomplete, the shadow librarian said in a voice like rustling paper. You must stay until your tales are properly cataloged. Every adventure, every joke, every moment of your lives must be recorded and filed away. Behind her, more shadow figures emerged from between the shelves, all carrying ledgers and stamps. They were the other visitors who had come to the library over the years, students, researchers, children looking for adventure stories. Now they were all librarians in the eternal collection. The shelves began to close in around them, books flying off the shelves and opening themselves, trying to capture their words, their thoughts, their very essence to add to the library's collection. The pages fluttered around them like paper birds, each one hungry for their story. Gumball and Darwin found themselves in the center of the library, where a massive desk sat surrounded by card catalogs that stretched up into the darkness. The desk was covered with checkout cards, all bearing their names, all marked overdue in red ink. Every story must have an ending, the shadow librarian intoned, raising a stamp that glowed with dark energy. And your ending is here, in the eternal library, where all tales come to rest. The stamp came down toward them, ready to mark them as permanent additions to the collection. The last thing they heard was the sound of pages turning, endless pages turning, as their own story was written into the library's eternal catalog. And then silence. This episode was reportedly found in the basement of the old Elmore Public Library after it was closed for renovations. Workers discovered a single VHS tape hidden behind a loose brick in the wall, along with checkout cards bearing the names of children who had visited the library decades ago and were never seen again. Those who have watched this episode report feeling uneasy in libraries and bookstores. Some claim to hear the sound of pages turning when they're alone with books, and others say they've seen their own names written in books they've never read. Remember, every story must have an ending, and some endings are written in libraries that never. The lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was never meant to be found. It started when Gumball discovered an old yearbook in the school library. The pages were yellowed with age, and the photos showed students he'd never seen before. But their names were all wrong. Where it should have said Darwin Watterson, it read Marcus Thompson. Where it should have said Penny Fitzgerald, it read Sarah Williams. Every single name was different. Every single face was wrong. But Darwin appeared in every photo, in the exact same position, with the exact same smile. When Gumball showed the yearbook to Darwin, his best friend just stared at him with empty, lifeless eyes. "What yearbook?" Darwin asked, his voice flat and emotionless. "I don't know what you're talking about." That's when Gumball noticed something else. Darwin's reflection in the library window wasn't moving. While Darwin walked around, his reflection stood perfectly still, watching Gumball with those same empty eyes. At school the next day, everyone acted like they'd always known about the yearbook. Miss Simeon was teaching from it instead of their regular textbook. When Gumball raised his hand to point out the problem, she looked right through him as if he wasn't there. During lunch, Gumball sat alone while Darwin joined a table full of other Darwins. 7 identical orange fish, all eating the same food, all making the same movements in perfect unison. They spoke in harmony, their voices creating an eerie echo that filled the cafeteria. The hallways began to stretch impossibly long. Gumball would walk toward his locker, but it kept getting further and further away. Other students walked past him in the exact same rhythm, their footsteps creating a mechanical beat that echoed off the walls. When Gumball finally reached his locker, it was filled with copies of the same yearbook. Dozens of them, all showing the same wrong names, all showing Darwin in every single photo. But now the photos were different. Now Darwin was staring directly at him from every page. Gumball ran home and burst through the front door. His family was sitting at the dinner table with 7 versions of Darwin. They were all having a normal conversation, as if nothing was wrong, as if this was how it had always been. "Who's Darwin?" his mother Nicole asked when Gumball mentioned the name. She pointed to an empty chair at the table. "There's no one here by that name, sweetie." That night, Gumball stared at Darwin's empty bed across the room. The bed that had always been there. The bed that now looked like it had never been slept in. When he looked in the mirror, his own reflection was starting to fade. First, his whiskers disappeared, then his ears. Soon, there would be nothing left of him at all. The family photos on the wall showed empty spaces where Gumball used to be. His school records had been erased. His friends didn't remember him. Even his own mother looked through him as if he were invisible. Meanwhile, Darwin was everywhere. In every classroom, being the perfect student. In every photo with that same unchanging smile. In every reflection, watching and waiting. Gumball finally understood. He wasn't the main character of this story. He never had been. Darwin was real. Darwin had always been real. And Gumball was just a forgotten dream. The yearbook closed with a soft thud. And somewhere in the empty space where a blue cat used to be, there was only silence.